Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'll be facilitating a conversation with my good friend Peter Scalzo here today. And we have a new topic, and it won't be why your ankles are so swollen. So you said that I was a jerk the other day, and it just has to come out. So I'm gonna have to be a jerk again.
Are you going to explain that now? The swollen ankle thing?
The fact that you have edema ankles?
Yeah. One of my ankles is that way.
One of your ankles,
Yeah.
yes. Peter's kidney functions are struggling from the different treatments that
and I've had so many lymph nodes removed. So
and so you're struggling a little bit.
Yep.
And but you're still here,
Yep.
and you still have peace, right?
Yes.
And you had some thoughts that we want to catch up on, and it's a great topic because I think there's a lot of ways to think about this, but. This concept, and you were talking about from Job, but the difference between knowing about God and experiencing God, that's what we wanted to talk about. And peace comes from experiencing God. Knowing about God might be false peace. Is that something you would say? I'm curious, because I think you could feel some level of peace, but it may not be real. And so I think we're wanting to dive in a little bit because there's a lot of knowing, I think, that is part of the early parts of any faith journey is as you go through a progression. And I think the reason why we want to talk about it is to not get stuck at just knowing, but to really get to experience God. I think is the reason why you want to talk about this, because that's where real peace is at. Is that a fair setup?
Yeah, very fair. Yeah.
I'll go just a step farther, and it's this, and I told you this Benjamin Bloom concept is how, he was like the father of modern education, and he had this 5 parameter model, and it was first, becoming aware. And then as you became aware about something, then you would become to a point of understanding and accepting that its importance, whatever that item might be, and how to apply it. And it's in this third step where it's maybe the hardest step to make on any journey of educational type, endeavor or life endeavor. And that was, I'm going to call it the action step, or it's actually, stepping into that item. And I think to experience God, there's something there. And I'll set up the reason why from my viewpoint. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this, but to experience God, there is that third step, which is a really hard hurdle to get through, is the why the why, I guess, getting past the why, but getting into the actual action mode. This is where most people get stuck in their educational journey. They become very knowledgeable, but they never apply it, or they never get into the water or the ocean or something and swim. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So, and out of that, once you're in that, I think once motions start happening, you become an expert and understanding. And the last step is, you evangelize, you share, and you help others to learn and grow in that same thing. And so those are the Bloom steps. And I think that fits back to where we're at. So we're thinking about, you can be in that place where and know a lot and feel like, hey, this knowledge is really helpful and understanding, but unless it engages in some kind of action and relational format, I think it's still kind of meaningless. Is that a fair setup?
I think it is. Sorry, I have a head cold today.
Yeah, you're like suffering in all manner. Yeah.
Sorry.
So Peter's getting ready to make a long trip, and so he's trying to get all his sicknesses out of the way before you travel over to Europe. Is that okay to say? Yeah,
sure.
And with the fam, and enjoy a little time.
Yep.
With your kids.
Yeah.
And so you're getting ready to put something in your mouth, and you're going to have this thing rolling around while we're talking to you, aren't you?
I appreciate that setup, Sean, and I wanted to just contribute how the topic came about for me personally, because I kind of brought it in here today saying, hey, let's do something on this. And it was really because, and one of the resources for Cancer and Peace has been John Eldridge, resilience and certain pause app and certain things that he has, really to get you into a contemplative place is really the purpose. Benevolent, detachment. I give everyone and everything to you, God. And he's been on this kick of like ordinary mystics is
Mm-hmm.
what he calls it. But it's this premise that as Christ followers, we should not only be not knowing about God, but also experiencing God. And I
Yeah.
was like, so I had to speak this past Sunday at a church, and part of the message that I gave was a really a quick reflection on Job. But at the end of the book of Job, after everything was said and done, and he had all the losses and suffering that he had, and he asked for an explanation from God. And God just said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world, and I feed the Leviathan, and I do. He just pointed to his creation, saying, "Hey, I'm in charge," kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But in the end, Job says something that I thought was really interesting. He said, "I only knew about you before, but now I have seen you." And I thought, oh, there's the knowing and experience connection. So something unique happened in Job's pathway through pain and suffering, and his wrestling,
Yeah.
because that book is about wrestling, isn't it?
Yes.
And so something happened to Job where he went just from knowing about God to experiencing God.
That's so good. I have one of the bigger influence in this space for me has been Henry Blackaby's work,
Mm.
Experiencing God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was three of the principles that have just been burned into my memory that are an important part of this. And I just see how much the cancer journey causes you to experience, or it's an invitation to experience God,
Mm-hmm.
I think is a better way of saying it. It doesn't cause it, but it surely is an invitation to experience him. And the three of the, I think he had seven, and I don't know all seven of them off the top of my head, but these three are the ones that have stuck out the most. And if you want to experience God, find out where he's at work and join him.
Mm.
So you have to put yourself in places where you see that he's at work, and join him in his work. And but the two that really stick out in this context is God always brings you to a crisis of belief
Mm.
that requires faith and action. And so it fits in with this Benjamin Bloom's that third
Yeah.
step. It's cancer is a crisis of belief. Of
Mm-hmm.
you actually have to go through this crisis of what do I really believe,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have to put your trust somewhere. And that's why I think Job, in what you're sharing there, he was brought to a crisis of belief.
Right.
And he had to choose where to put his trust. What am I going to
Right.
trust in? Am I going
Right.
to, his wife invited him to curse God and die.
Right.
And he was in the place of, naked I was brought into this world, naked I'm going to leave. I'm not going to curse God. I'm going to trust him.
Yeah.
And to me, that's such a big example of the cancer journey, and why I
Mm-hmm.
think Job came out on the other side after he had walked through this really deep experience, and he had gone through that crisis, and he chose to step in with his faith
Mm-hmm.
and trusting God.
Yeah.
And so I think the cancer journey is such a representation of that.
Yeah. So I can so relate to that. The other thing about Job that I love during that confusing in between stage, as you talked about in our last podcast, is that he embraced or he expressed tough emotions, and God didn't discipline him for that. God never even mentioned it. It was okay for him to do that. It was okay for him to feel fear, anger, and sadness and process it. And I think that's really helpful for me, and helpful as I traveled my cancer journey, or do travel it in, especially in the evangelical space, or whatever we want to call it. I know that's not a good word these days, so I'm not sure what we're calling it. But anyway, in the space of, is it okay? Do I have permission to feel these tough feelings? Does that mean that I have a lack of faith? And I think the issue is no. In fact, it's the opposite. Because I know Jesus is real, and I can bring those emotions to him and say, what's going on here? But I think for sure, when you said crisis of belief will bring about the reality of faith, I'm not sure if that's how you put it, but I know that in my 14th surgery in 2015, and I've talked about it a lot, that was the sea change, 3 surgeons, tough outcome, 5% chance of survival, sitting in ICU. I remember saying to myself, this is where the rubber meets the road, right here. Because I am going to die from this. What do I really believe? What do I really think? What is my soul telling me? And it was in that place of what was very dark at the time where I embraced um, really my faith about which was in Jesus. I embraced him. And the scriptures which I had read for years took on new meaning in that context because of where I was at. And it was that period of wrestling because I was angry, so angry with God at first. My son was there to read scriptures and play hymns, and I didn't want to participate at all.
Would you say that this was the place where knowing changed to experiencing, or
I think
when would
that
you decide that in your
yeah, I think I had known Jesus as like Savior and provider and things like that. But that, in the darkness of that ICU experience and facing death, excuse me, I, for the first time, experienced Jesus as a refuge, a sustainer, a rescuer, a comforter, a healer. I didn't know that before. I mean, I knew it in my mind, but I experienced it in my soul.
So I'll put a few
Yeah, please.
definitions around this just to maybe add clarity, and you can say, hey, that makes sense or not. What I think I hear is we are not talking about, in religious terms, what's a saving faith here. We're talking about, so somebody may know God and whether or not they have a saving faith in God, that's something not for us. We're not trying to determine here. But what you're really saying is that experience with God happened. And I used this term earlier when we were talking, it's the foxhole. It's
Right.
when you were in the foxhole and there's this war going on around you. You figured out who you could trust and what you could rely on, who you could rely on. And in that moment you experienced God's trustworthiness, his salvation, his healing power, all those things. That experience came from this foxhole moment of a cancer survival moment from a traumatic surgery. Is that a fair definition? So we're not trying to split hairs here, but we're really trying to make sure there is probably, people can have a knowledge of God and probably in some sense a mustard seed of faith, even though they haven't
Right.
fully experienced and have a
Right.
saving, it's not as if we're questioning your eternal security
Right.
spending here.
Right.
We're talking about finding peace in your current life. How do you do that? And I think what you're describing but that comes from not just knowing about and having a mustard seed, but it's actually letting that seed germinate in that, as it
Yeah.
is put into the pressure and that process, it grows into something that is that faith in action that Blackaby was talking about. It's like, hey, you want to experience God, put your faith in action and let those crises that come, change you. I'm going to say the last one and see if it clicks in too with this conversation. And that was Blackaby said, to join God in what he's doing, you must make major adjustments in your life.
Mm.
And so God's always looking at us and saying, hey, if you want to join me in what we're doing, what I'm doing, you're going to have to. It's not as if, God's not going to adjust to us in that sense. We have to adjust to where he's at. In his perfection, we need to join him in what he's inviting us into.
Right.
And so to experience him, which I thought was it's a bit of a change in thought process for most of us, because most of the time I'm trying to get God to do my journey, not join what he's actually already laid out.
Yeah, I think that what resonates with me is when Scazzero says that with deep suffering comes a deeper revelation with God, and I think when you already have a relationship with God and Jesus, and you experience this time of unbelievable pain and suffering and hardship, you have a choice, right? You can either choose to this is the wall issue, right? Run to a coping mechanism, bounce off the wall, run away, that kind of thing, or choose to go through the wall. And going through the wall is a painful process, right? But it's going through the wall where you're turning over, surrendering, that I believe my relationship with Jesus grew incredibly through that wall. I think it was me clinging and a dependence on him. I mean, I've gone through many periods of time in which, twice they told me to go home and call hospice and Sloan Kettering. That's what their advice was. But I think about just having metastatic cancer and so many recurrences each day. I get up and it's like I wonder if something's going to pop up today, And and yet, okay, Jesus, I turn my life and my will. I commit everything to you today. That's a prayer of mine usually every day. I struggle. I want control, right? But
I think that's probably so for putting definition around this,
mm-hmm.
when I think about that concept of I must make major adjustments, part of it is accepting the cancer journey as a major adjustment. So in other words, rather than we talked about denying your journey and denying the fact that you may have cancer in a previous episode, just denying
Yeah,
the realities, but experiencing God is accepting that you are on this cancer journey. And in some ways, that journey crossed God's desk. I mean, Jesus signed off on saying he didn't cause it, but he signed off on saying that journey has something of great meaning for this
right.
person. And so, yes, that the fact that you're on this journey, the fact that you've been on this journey for 19 years now,
Mm-hmm.
it crossed Jesus's death, so to speak.
Yep.
And it's because he wanted to have that deep relational. It's one of the reasons, I think, is the deep relational and transformative experience that you've had in your life, and
Right.
to allow ministry to flow out of that is one of the reasons. And there's,
Right.
probably the same way Job didn't fully understand why his suffering. I can't sit here now. It would be wrong for me to sit here now and say, well, that is the reason. So I had to revise back and say, well, we can see some of those things now, and
Right.
we see through a glass dimly, so to speak. But and so it helps to know that there is purpose there behind the
Mm-hmm.
suffering, but it doesn't mean we're going to know all the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting to think about for, what you've gone through and what it means to make a major adjustment is to accept that God is in it as part of, I think, one of the things that's there.
I think that's huge. Acceptance huge. And I was thinking about and mentioned it this past Sunday in this church service about Paul experiencing this thorn in the flesh. Obviously he had this wonderful experience. The scripture says being caught up in heaven. So it's like a near death experience that he has.
Mm-hmm.
That every folks who have experienced it talk about. And then he came back down and he doesn't know if he was in the body, out of the body. He doesn't know. But it's this experience he had that was unbelievable. He saw things and heard things that he couldn't even talk about. And so the scripture says in order for him not to be prideful, God gave him a thorn in the flesh. He prayed 3 times for it to be removed. It was obviously painful, but the message in that was my power is made complete in your weakness. That is a paradox, isn't it? But I think how true that is for my life, that I've experienced his power in me and through me because I know that I can't do it.
Yeah, such
My
a
own
great
weakness. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that it's paradoxical
Yeah.
Is interesting, right? Is that if you want to experience more of the greatest power
Yeah.
that exists, you have to become weak and broken.
So when I stand up to give a testimony of what God has done in and through me, I don't talk about my knowledge of Scripture or my knowledge of God. I talk about my experience. I talk about in vulnerable terms. I struggle with pain. I struggle with fear, anger, and sadness.
Yeah, and I want to just highlight something, and just you just triggered a thought,
Yeah.
and I'll see what your thoughts are related to this comment. We're not speaking against knowledge.
Right.
Knowledge is super important. In fact, I think one wants to be a lifelong knowledge learner,
Yeah.
and continue to grow in it. And a buff. I love to read and discuss and understand new things.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about is going one more step past that. It was
Right.
the Benjamin Bloom model is knowledge is just the second step. And so, and it's not, I'm not trying to demean it. We're actually saying, no, knowledge is super important. Without understanding, we're kind of, you can't place faith in, it's not a blind faith. I mean, that's the best way of saying it. We're not actually talking about blind faith here. We're talking about faith, putting action behind your understanding.
Right.
And then what happens on the backside of that is when you put action behind the understanding that you have,
Yeah.
then you get to have experience.
Right.
And God shows up in a big way when we are willing to put our mustard grain of faith
Right.
with Him. And I think that's why John Eldridge is really highlighting this is so important, is that it's my belief, and I think yours too, and you can say yes or no to this, but is that a lot of the churches that we've been involved with have gotten stuck in the knowledge side. I'll go to a service and I hear knowledge imparted, but there's little shared about the experiences of faith in action. And so we talk a bunch about the importance of testimony in our journeys, because testimony, the reason why you're here sharing your 19-year cancer journey is because the most powerful tool you have for helping other people to experience peace is your experiences through that journey that is paired with the knowledge of the truth and understanding
Yeah.
of God's word
Yeah.
and who He is.
Yeah. I
Is
think
that
that's fair to say. I think my own experience is that my experiencing God was built on a foundation of knowing about Jesus and God. Lots of reading through the scriptures, real hunger for the word, sitting under a lot of teachers. And I think about, one of the comments Jesus had about the Pharisees, because they knew the scriptures so well. I mean, better than anyone else. But he said, your hearts are far from me. And excuse me, it's that issue of knowing you can know about God, but yet not experience Him and really have an intimacy with Him.
I would have called myself a Christian rationalist.
Okay.
Not, I mean, in hindsight now,
Right.
I
Right.
actually didn't think about it in those terms for a while, but it was, if you think about in the Western world, we've taken such a scientific, rationalized approach to how things work, and if A plus B equals C, then I can formulaically figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
But it was based upon being able to use reasonable or rational understanding to approach the world. And so you hear so many times this concept of, why don't we see miracles? Well, we live in the Western world, and this is how we treat everything. And you just talked about Christian mystics. Mystics don't approach the world purely with rational thoughts. They understand there's mystery, and we've talked about mystery before. But in that understanding, it wasn't until mission. I mean, I lived my life fully using my understanding and rationalism way into my 40s, basically going, if X, if I do this, if I work hard, if I do 80 hours a week or whatever, I'm going to amass enough wealth to provide security. I had all my plans worked out the way it would work. And the truth is that I received exactly the fruit of my labor, but it's not enough. And especially it's not enough for a cancer journey, because my labor and your labor isn't going to cure cancer.
Right.
It's not going to solve a cancer patient's problems. At some point in time, you run into a wall, which I did also. And in that wall, I was in mission, and I ran into the wall, and I recognized that I had to actually do this Black and B principle. It's like I had to approach this crisis of belief and place my faith outside of just my rationalistic mind in God. And I get to see miracles for the first time in my life. And I was blown away. absolutely blown away. It was like, wait a second. But when I look back at my life, I never allowed for it. Whenever a crisis of belief came on it, it was always, I had to come up with a rational solution and apply my power to that. And I think the reason why cancer is such a big wall is because it's an invite outside of the rationalistic westernized world that we've tried to scientifically solve everything and put a person into. But what do you really trust? Because that mind there that you have can't solve
Right.
the greatest crisis in a cancer journey.
Right.
And that's what you've experienced, I
Yeah.
think, is that, hey, you got to that point and
Mm-hmm.
there were no medical solutions.
I think 3 years ago too, I met with the head of my type of cancer at Memorial Sloan Kettering, who I went down to the city, met with he and his team, and he was at the forefront of all the clinical trials and everything for my type of cancer, and he sat down in front of me with his team and he said, "We really don't know what we're doing." And I said, I can tell. I can tell, because we're just trying different things, and we had immunotherapy, we're trying that, we're trying all these different avenues. And he was honest about it, which I thought was great. Transparent.
He actually admitted to, it's called medical practice.
Yeah.
And you're a practice subject.
and in that 2017 end of life diagnosis that I had, and we watched that tumor disappear inside my bladder, I said, wow, man-made immunotherapy. And my surgeon said, immunotherapy, nothing. Like man-made stuff, nothing. This is God. It's pretty interesting, right?
That's so fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it implies exactly what we're talking about. And I think this subject is deeper and richer than what we're going to even touch on today.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see if we could carry it on with some thoughts for another episode that we should be thinking about a little bit here too. But
and also your own journey, Sean, into knowing versus experiencing God.
I think that would be a cool, maybe next episode we could talk on those
your
items.
thoughts on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think today, just getting that concept out there a little bit of, if you're in your journey and you've recognized you're at a crisis of belief, I think what this is your invitation to experience God.
Yeah.
But you'll only experience it by taking whatever mustard seeds, and I say that as a biblical term, is, one of the smallest of seeds, and whatever that small, whatever you have of faith, is reaching your hand out and putting that into God's hand and getting to experience it. Experience whatever he's bringing into from your cancer journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about here. And then you're going to have something to share off of that.
Yeah, because you just triggered the story of...
I triggered you?
Yeah. Well, you usually trigger me. But you triggered the story of when they wanted to try out my neobladder for the first time, and I had to plug up a suprapubic tube, it's called, and I had to pee for the first time without, completely different way. Everything had been stripped from me. And so it was my female surgeon, because I had 2 surgeons for that surgery, and 2 nurses. And when I got up to pee into this urinal, I had to do it standing up. My gown fell off, so I was just naked. And a little bit of dribble, after really trying to crank it out, a little bit of dribble came out, and they erupted in applause and said, yay, yay. And so I was transported back to a 2-year-old Peter, learning how to be potty trained. And I felt the Lord speak in that moment and say, and this is how I want you to be with me, a child. And I think that to me, how a child experiences life, it's really beautiful, Like I was with my granddaughter yesterday, and just watching her, she's 19 months old, watching her experience, we were at the beach and experiencing life. It's really a beautiful thing, I'm not sure how that relates exactly, but I'm sure you can You can
I
put
it
the
together.
pieces together. Do it, Sean. That's what you do. Put the pieces together.
No, you described it well. Unless you enter the kingdom as a little child,
Yeah.
you really are taking and putting. A child says they don't look around and try to figure out how to solve, their financial troubles for tomorrow. All of this, they literally trust their parent. And that's what we're talking about here is that as a cancer patient, if you want to have peace, you're going to take a little bit of faith, the way a child has a faith in their parent, providing all. They're not sitting there thinking about what are we, am I going to get fed tomorrow? It's no, I trust this adult, this somebody of authority who loves me. And for us in our journeys, that's where we're at, is that as a cancer patient, you're being asked to take whatever faith you have and just trust God, just release that. And there's great peace because what's going to happen is God's not going to abandon you. You're going to experience God in a new, fresh, and real way. And I think that's what we're talking about in this podcast. I think there's more to share and talk about in some future episodes, but hopefully that gives a flavor of what you're trying to express in finding peace by experiencing God, not just knowing about God. And so we'll call that a wrap today.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks everyone
Appreciate
for listening, and hope to see you or hear from you on future episodes.
Yep.
In the meantime, check out cancerandpeace.com and all the resources that are out there. I think there's even links to John Eldridge's Wild at Heart stuff on that we referenced today. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you.